I would say this is the first show that you said pass for?
Yes.
Yeah. Why is that? Was it just
only because it's too much at this point. Like at this point, especially since I was already watching Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Which is a gauntlet in of itself.
That's true.
And I was like, I'll see what people are saying about Miss Marvel, and it's the same thing. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like every single Marvel show has been just okay.
Yeah.
Or just boring. Some of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just like, I'm not gonna bother.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have better things to do now.
Which is fair, because I feel like when you get to a certain point like this, what I found in the MCU in Phase 4 so far is that there's a lot more creative freedom, at least to a larger extent than there were in past phases. Like, sure, there's still a tendency to end different shows and movies and stuff with very similar, the same way that, like, the one criticism of the MCU was that every movie had to end with a big sky beam, And it's like, yeah, there's still a little bit of that in the MCU now. But, like, Multiverse of Madness was a Sam Raimi film, and Love and Thunder is a Taika Waititi film, for better or for worse, and there's a lot less emphasis on continuity and crossover with other known properties and stuff like that. And Ms. Marvel is the same way. I liked Ms. Marvel, and I don't know where I would rank it in my Disney Plus ranking, but I was telling David earlier, I think I enjoyed it overall a little bit more than Moon Knight. I think it kind of ties with Moon Knight, in my opinion, but the thing that kind of makes it stand out is, one, it follows Kamala Khan, who is the first Pakistani hero in the MCU, and, like, in the comics, I'm pretty sure, too. So that's very cool as far as, like, representation goes. And then also, it's another... We haven't seen this in a really long time, but it's a hero in high school, and she's younger, and she's just figuring out what her powers are. Because, like, we've had, like, Kate Bishop in the MCU, and we've seen, Florence Pugh as Yelena. Forget what her last name in the MCU is. I don't know. I just call her Yelena? I'm sorry, Flo, I love you. But we haven't seen a hero, like, start to get good, with training sequences with their new powers and stuff like that. So that was a refreshing kind of take on this. So, yeah, I feel like I enjoyed it for the most part. There were definitely some parts that, like, dragged, and there were some emotional beats that didn't always hit. But, yeah, there were some moments that made me tear up a little bit, and there were some moments that got me hype. And spoilers for Ms. Marvel, I guess, if you haven't seen it, but... yeah, she gets to say "embiggen" in the last episode, and you get to see her really, like, use her powers in a substantial way past, like, the smaller ways that she'd been using it in the show up until that point. You get to see, like, the different phases of her costume. You get to see Avengers Con in the first episode, which is a big plot point in the Avengers game, which I played through, like, last year. Yeah, and I think the supporting cast is really fun too. Like, particularly, I like the dad, and I like her brother. I think her brother is, like, my favorite character in the show. He's just so funny, and yeah. But things that, like, I didn't really like. And sorry if this seems a little one-sided, but I think this is, like, the first, like, since Breaking Bad, like, show or movie that, like, only one of us has, like, seen. So it's mostly. Sorry if it's mostly me talking. But yeah, no, I mean, as far as things that I didn't like, I think there was a whole, like, episode of backstory, which is important to the plot, but it introduces characters that I don't know. I was definitely, like, on my phone for most of that episode, and I think the CG, you can tell that, like, the Disney Plus show budget for CG isn't as high as the movie's budget, at least at this point. I think the way that they changed Kamala's powers from the comics is basically just a big FU to the Inhumans as a concept. so the Inhumans, there's a really interesting backstory as far as how, like, why the MCU and why Marvel is treating the Inhumans the way that they are at this point. So, yeah, the Inhumans in the comics are very much like mutants, where there's like, you know, they aren't like given superpowers, like, you know, super soldier serum or like, you know, whatever, but they're like born with these powers. In the comics, they get them from like the Terrigen Mist, and they're regular humans, and then they develop powers through that. But the Inhumans, as far as I know, are like aliens, and, you know, Black Bolt is the king of the Inhumans, and they made a show on ABC which tanked and did not do very well. But in the comics, there was a huge, I guess, not war, but when Fox still owned the rights to X-Men, Marvel as a company was like, okay, well, if you're going to make money off of this property, we're going to stop making the X-Men comics, we're going to stop making X-Men toys, we're going to stop including X-Men in like all of the games and stuff, just to kind of like get at Fox for owning those characters and making so much money off of them. And eventually, it got to a point where Marvel kind of tried to replace the X-Men with the Inhumans because their role in the comics were kind of similar, like similar enough. And
copy my homework, just change a little bit so you won't notice.
Yeah, right. So like, you know, so they were really pushing the Inhumans and kind of phasing out the X-Men, and then they just bought Fox. So now, in a cruel twist of irony, they're undoing a lot of the focus that has been set on the Inhumans now that they have mutants back. So in this show, Kamala Khan is not an Inhuman like she is in the comics, but instead she's a mutant. And we can confirm that it is the X-Men type of mutant because the moment that her friend, I think his name is Bruno, because one character in the show keeps calling him Brian. Like the whole show, he calls him Brian, and he's like, "My name's Bruno, man." Like I feel, but Bruno is like the friend, and he's like very smart, and he's going to Caltech, and you know, and so he discovers that her genes aren't like her family's in that there's a mutation, and when he says mutation, the X-Men theme that they played in Multiverse of Madness when when Professor X showed up, the ba-na-na-na-na-na plays when he mentions mutation. So it confirms that mutants are in the MCU, like, and not just a part of the Illuminati, but they are in the MCU, and Kamala Khan is a mutant, not an Inhuman. So between that and basically like murdering Black Bolt and Inhuman, I mean, they murder Professor X too, but like Black Bolt basically gets nothing to do in Multiverse of Madness. It's basically like Marvel, like the MCU is like flipping off Inhumans and trying to replace them with mutants and like hype up mutants again. So aside from being a mutant, there's also a post-credit scene where it was filmed by the crew that's filming The Marvels, like the Captain Marvel sequel. Brie Larson shows up because Kamala's bangle, I think, her wristband, starts freaking out, and then she warps out of space and in-warps Brie Larson, and she sees Kamala's room that has a bunch of like Captain Marvel paraphernalia around, and so she starts freaking out. She's like, oh no, you know, and that's it. So I can guarantee that's going to be in the Captain Marvel movie, and maybe a plot point of the next movie is going to be this found family theme where, you know, Kamala Khan meets Carol Danvers finally, and then what is it, Monica Rambeau? Because I think Maria is the mom. Yeah, Monica is probably going to be swept up in this, you know, whooshing in and out of space, and they all find each other and become the Marvels. So overall, I think it's a fine show. I definitely think it's like, if you're not a big Ms. Marvel fan, or if you don't have the time to really commit to watching, you know, the whole show, then at least like watch the last bit, because that's what's going to have significance like moving forward within the entire continuity of the MCU. So, mutants and Captain Marvel's back.